you like electronic music? It's all around us today, like the oxygen in the air we breathe, from the top of the pops to the oddest sounds of the underground. But from where and when did it originate? 1980s England? What about 1970s Germany? Could it be 1960s America? 1950s Canada, perhaps? Surely no earlier than 1940s Egypt. And yet, here we are. If you're interested in discovering exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes, tune into SynKult every other Tuesday from 10 to midnight for a vista of electronic sound from the field's pioneers to its current cutting edge, all placed in historical and cultural context by me, your guide, DJ Victor Alls. From musique concrète to minimal wave, space rock to speed garage, acid house to ambient, you'll find it all on SynKult. Greetings and welcome to another evening of SynKult. I'm DJ Victor Alls, and it's great to be your steersman for these next 2 hours of choppy electronic waters that skew very UK tonight. Before we get any further upriver, I should let you know that the bed music you're hearing right now and will be hearing throughout the show comes from Spring Heel Jack's 1996 album, 68 Million Shades. They're one of those studio-centric, atmospheric drum and bass acts, which is in my opinion underappreciated because they never really were part of the whole DJ circuit, with the publicity that can afford. With that, if you've been listening to SynKult for a while, you might have picked up on that I'm fond of dubstep, meaning the original South London scene that ran from roughly 2002 to 2010, depending on who's counting, and the revivalist offshoots that exist to this day. Although there were many factors that contributed to the collapse of the original 2000s dubstep scene, one of them was what the heads call the tearout sound. Rate Your Music defines tearout as, quote, characterized by a gritty, aggressive, and dance floor-focused sound, emphasizing punchy and dominant mid-range, wobbly sound design, contrasting with the atmospheric and deep sound of earlier dubstep. Tearout generally features greater dynamic differences throughout the track as well, often with pronounced drops and build-ups that somewhat contrast with earlier, repetitive styles, end quote. Now, like with most things audio, actually hearing tearout is worth more than 1,000 words describing it. So, you know what? Before jumping into this next segment of SynKult, here are a couple of examples of the tearout sound in practice, both in UK dubstep and later global brostep. Those excerpts are from X-Rated from 2011 by Excision, a Canadian brostep artist, Shock It from 2010 by Digital Mystics, a foundational South London dubstep duo, more on them later, The Terminator from 2009 by Caspa, another foundational South London dubstep producer, and Bonfire from 2016 by Knife Party, an Australian brostep duo. I think you can hear what's shared in the 4 excerpts. This is the sound most people today think of when they hear the word dubstep, a manic, aggro, and decadent sound used in 2010's party movies, MLG no-scope YouTube compilations, and television commercials as a sort of 21st century update to the hedonism of Yellow's. So, that's tearout defined. The now viral 2021 YouTube video essay, Why All My Homies Hate Skrillex by Timba on Toast, says the invention of tearout was a turning point for the South London scene when it started being spun in 2007 by several of the scene's foundational DJ producers. Timba on Toast cites a 2007 Pitchfork article by the dubstep DJ, producer, and blogger Martin Clark, aka Blackdown, who isolates the emergence of tearout to a then recent track by Koki, one half of the Digital Mystics production duo. That Koki track is titled SpongeBob, and I'm going to play it for you right now. That was SpongeBob by Koki from his 2008 SpongeBob The End EP. As these things usually go in scenes that privilege physical media, Koki produced SpongeBob in 2007 and shared it amongst his friends on acetate, playing it at gigs before eventually releasing it in 2008. Many heads cite SpongeBob as a major turning point away from the deep, dubbed-out sound of early dubstep towards a faster and more aggro style that would change the makeup of the UK scene and, beginning in 2010, was appropriated by producers outside the UK, producers like Skrillex, Bass Nectar, and Excision. The Martin Clark Pitchfork article Timba on Toast cites predicts this sonic shift rather well from the standpoint of 2007. In it, Clark writes, quote, "A recent dance floor fave in Chef and Mala sets is a new Koki dub, possibly called SpongeBob. For a while, parts of dubstep has been entering into a drum and bass style harder than thou contest, and SpongeBob certainly holds its own. The result is so cold and alien, does differentiate itself from other run-of-the-mill dark dubstep beats, making it quite an original production in how it balances its elements. But the question needs to be asked, aesthetically, does dubstep really need to get that hard, dark, and cold?" End quote. It's a very perceptive argument, but there's more to the origin story of tearout than what Clark and Timba on Toast led on. Take it from Rosie Overdrive, who compiled Ultimate Box Set Dubstep over on Rate Your Music. This list is considered one of the definitive ones of its kind, even by the pedantic neckbeard nerds on Rate Your Music. Here's what Rosie Overdrive has to say about a track by Digital Mystics titled Eartha Run Red, from their Walkin' with Jaw, Eartha Run Red EP, pressed to wax for the general public in June 2006. Quote, "A lot of people like to cite SpongeBob as the first brostep song, but here's Koki with Eartha Run Red a whole year earlier. I can't even imagine what this must have sounded like in 2006. Just absolutely massive. Koki essentially turns lasers into an instrument on this one, creating a sort of template we'd hear in many brostep songs to come, all the while staying firmly rooted within dubstep." End quote. To clear up any confusion, Koki and Mala are members of the pioneering dubstep production duo Digital Mystics, who I've mentioned a few times in this episode. Friends since high school, they started DJing drum and bass in the late 90s and started producing music of their own beginning in the early 2000s on a broken laptop, founding arguably the first dedicated dubstep club night called DMZ at 3rd Base in Brixton, circa March 2005. Koki, Mala, and Digital Mystics are all names to pay attention to. Now, on to Eartha Run Red by Digital Mystics. was Earther Run Red by Digital Mystics, first pressed to wax in June 2006 and probably spun at DMZ club nights in the months prior. Is that the true origin story of the tearout sound, as Rosie Overdrive seems to imply? Well, the answer is not quite. Rate Your Music also doesn't seem to have the right answer. If one goes to the tearout subgenre page, the website suggests 3 earlier EPs whose claims to the title of first tearout track are tenuous at best and flat-out incorrect at worst for reasons that would probably be too lengthy for me to get into tonight. Instead, let's take the tearout origin story straight from the horse's mouth. There's a 2008 interview with Mala conducted by Red Bull Music Academy, which you can find on YouTube, where Mala goes over the origin story of the tearout sound, although he doesn't call it that yet. I assume that tearout was unnamed as of 2008, or at least the name wasn't hegemonic. Let's roll the segment.
Koki, man, like, I've known Koki for years, and the guy fascinates me still after knowing him for such a long period of time. I'm going to play you a track that he done called Haunted, and he done this track, I think it was in 2005, and I remember him sitting at my car at the end of the road. He's like, yeah, I done this tune, it ain't finished yet, but have a quick listen to it, it'll be finished next week, and DMZ was like next week. And he played me this tune, yeah, and I just started cracking up laughing, because instantly I kind of heard what it was going to do to people's like minds, just because of what it done to my mind. Anti-war dub, where is it? I think this track as well also was very influential on what was to later happen in this dubstep thing.
To this, Mala later portentously adds,
these tunes were like made and played at a time where these were the only type of tunes in the set or in the dance hall night that would sound this kind of way. And now you can go to a dance and there's like many versions of this kind of thing going on, which is fine, but only if it's done well, I think.
Composed by Koki in 2005, as Mala says, Haunted was pressed to wax in 2006, and here it is. That was Haunted by Koki, composed sometime in 2005 and released the following year. To my reckoning, Haunted is the true origin story of the tearout sound. That said, dates are confusing, and I don't want to be too arrogant. After all, as a Yankee, the closest I've gotten to South London was a long layover in London Heathrow well after 2010. I think one of the reasons the dates are confusing is that UK dubstep was one of the last scenes that ran on physical media. One reason for this was the roots and culture tied into the legacy of Jamaican dub and UK jungle, in short, what Simon Reynolds famously called the hardcore continuum, and Linton Kwesi Johnson calls bass culture. Another was having physical plates mastered and cut for a sound system rig just sounded better than playing a general-purpose digital mixdown intended for headphone listening. There's a segment about this nuance narrated by Transition Studios owner Jason Gause in the 2008 documentary Bassweight that I highly recommend and can be found on YouTube for free. Gause was the man all the producers at the time went to get their dubs mastered. A third reason was the scene's sense of more or less friendly showmanship and competition. It's easier to have exclusive dub plates for you and your buds to DJ battle with when each is a physical plate of acetate versus a digital file that can be copied at will. As such, the lag time between initial compositions heard in clubs and full releases you could find at specialist record stores was highly variable and required being present in the materiality of the scene, and even then you only really got a partial picture. I think Mark Fisher put it all best in his 2012 article for the journal SynKult, reflecting on the hardcore continuum, writing, quote, "Here was a system in place tight enough to ensure a kind of evolving consistency, but loose enough to enable innovation. Here was a culture in which there was interactivity and participation, but it happened at the right speed. The circuit in place didn't flatten out into immediate access for everyone. Unlike Web 2.0, the time of the hardcore continuum was still a punctual time. It was still the time of dub plates, clubs, and record releases, not the dissolute and distributed Web 2.0 time of leaked MP3 downloads, play anytime webcasts, and instantaneous comment," end quote. But that's enough of that chin wagging. I've got one final piece of dubstep for you tonight, this time without any tearout in sight. This is a very rare 2005 cut by Lofa that I had to source from a YouTube rip because it was nowhere else that I'm privy to. Titled Route 1, the track was originally the B-side of Lofa's 2006 release, Route, The Goat Stare, but was replaced with The Goat Stare for some reason. Here's what Georgina Cook had to say about Route 1 on her blog, Drums of the South, recounting an October 2005 Skull Disco night at Stoke in Southwark, where, quote, Koki suffered a few technical hitches when a speaker decided to give up, which at one point made it sound like we were dancing in mud, draw for the spade as Polk said. But his mystical bag of tricks easily made up for it, specifically Lofa's Ghost 1, a killer of a jungle sample mashup that received a respectable amount of rewinds and transported me back a good few years while remaining completely fresh. The DMZ camp have never made a secret of their love of old-school jungle, and it's none more apparent than this Metalheads-esque tune that had me smiling through messy dance hair, end quote. Dang, sounds like a night to remember. Now, on to the very rare Ghost 1 by Lofa from 2005. You heard Ghost One by Lofa, a very rare cut from early pressings of his Root, the Goat Stare EP, before the Goat Stare replaced it on the B-side. Leaving dubstep behind, but keeping within the general UK sound, is a 1995 cut from Basic Movement titled Bubble and Wine, pressed by East London's own Suburban Bass Records. Basic Movement is one of the many aliases of the Smith brothers, Lee and Warren Smith, known for a plethora of jungle projects including notably Dread Bass. Anyway, Bubble and Wine stands out to me for two reasons. The first is its really slick and minimalist jump-up style breaks. The other is its excellent masculine-feminine call-and-response vocal pattern, sampling African-American R&B diva Brandy and Indian-British reggae singer Apache Indian. Remember, it's not just the white boys who learn patois to assimilate into sound system culture. Here's Bubble and Wine by Basic Movement from 1995.
bubble and wine. Hard, and the crew them 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 hard, and the crew them hard, and the crew them bubble and wine. Hard, and the crew them hard, and the crew them hard, and the crew them bubble and wine. Hard, and the crew them bubble and wine. And the crew them bubble and wine. Ah, the crew them bubble and wine. Ah, and the crew them bubble and wine.
That was Bubble and Wine by Basic Movement from their 1995 Jelly, Bubble and Wine EP. Of course, the UK sound came stateside in the early 1990s with the likes of Scott Hardkiss, whose Hardkiss Records played a major role in helping shape the early San Francisco electronic sound and scene. Scott had studied abroad in England while a student at NYU during the second summer of love, where he was reading NME and Melody Maker and attending a lot of raves. When Scott and his brothers from other mothers, Robbie and Gavin, graduated in 1991, they packed up their car and drove cross-country to San Francisco to bring the UK sound to a new community of young people. Once there, they founded Hardkiss Records in the fall of '91, and the rest is history. One of their most famous releases is the Spiritual Thirst mix of Rain Cry, which is Scott Hardkiss producing under his God Within alias. Rain Cry was Hardkiss Records' fourth release and dates from 1991. Not just the UK sound, it also has this sort of tribal, techno-hippie edge to it, like condensed California sunshine that could never have been conceived under gloomy UK skies. You heard the spiritual thirst mix of Rain Cry by Scott Hardkiss from 1993. British music journalist Chris Need says of Hardkiss's music that it, quote, defies musical barriers, time and space, with off-the-teabags, loved-out majesty, and manages to suspend the listener in a bottomless pool of fragrant intoxicants and rabid aphrodisiac heart rhythms, end quote. Flowery language, but I think I tend to agree. Equally saturated is this really cool 1984 disco fusion effort by a German duo calling themselves Sada Bonaire, consisting of Stephanie Lang and Claudia Hosfeld. Dennis Bovell produced for them, so let's hear his side of the story.
Because I then went to Germany to work with a group that were doing something revolutionary. They were called Sada Bonaire. And there was two German girls who were employing the services of the Turkish National Orchestra and me in Bremen, in West Germany, to create a disco kind of Arabic feel record. Mm-hmm. And I thought, this is a great opportunity. So when my friend Ralph von Richter called me up and said, look, this is an opportunity, let's do something groundbreaking. Mm-hmm. I was there in a shot. And, we did this record that has just been re-released. And these two young girls were not interested in singing. They were poets. They were reciting, like in a kind of way like Amanda Lear. Mm-hmm. They were reciting in a fashion that later became Grace Jones's thing.
The project was first released as a 3-track EP in 1984. More EPs and possibly an album were in the works, but their contract with EMI fell apart, and the core duo jumped ship to other work. Fortunately, all of Sada Bonaire's music was remastered and released in an album in 2013. You Could Be More As You Are is one of the tracks found on both the 1984 EP and the 2013 retrospective album.
Everything more as you are, can't you see? You could be anything, you could be free. You could be more as you are, can't you see? You could be anything, you could be free. You could be more as you are, can't you see? You could be anything, you could be free. You could be more as you are, can't you see? You could be anything, you could be free. You could be more as you are, can't you see? You could be anything, you could be free.
That was You Could Be More As You Are by Sado Bonaire from their 1984 EP. A darker take on synth disco next, also from 1984 by Lancashire-based band Section 25. Although you got this sort of ethereal industrial dance sound and some Belgian and German EBM of the era, it was relatively uncommon in the UK at the time. With the possible exception of Portion Control, you didn't really get it in the UK until the mid to late 80s with Coil and Alan Wilder of Depeche Mode's solo project Recoil. Enjoy the Looking from a Hilltop megamix by Section 25 from their 1984 album From the Hip. From the Hip was released on Factory Records. Go figure. I'm DJ Victor Alls, and this is SynKult, coming to you from Freeform Portland, KFFP-LP Portland, KFFD-LP Beaverton, and on the web at freeformportland.org. Now, back to the program. You heard the devilishly dark industrial disco sound of Section 25, in particular the Megamix cut of Looking from a Hilltop from their 1984 album, From the Hip. And now, for something I've been hoping to do for months, if not years, and finally got a chance to do just last week. That's right, I've got an artist interview for you all. And not just any artist. British noise musician and storyteller James Thompson is someone I've been following for several years now, if not necessarily through his music, through his audio drama Subterraneans, about all things weird and eerie in the greater London conurbation, heavily threaded through with urban history, music, and radical politics. Subterraneans checks an eerie number of boxes for me personally. I've listened to every episode at least once, and some many times over. As well as writing and producing the show, James Thompson composes all of his own music and incidental sound, some of which can be found on his Bandcamp page, Subterpod. Once again, that's Subterpod as in SUBTERPOD at bandcamp.com. His Subterraneans podcast can be found on all major podcast platforms. I personally listen to it on Apple Podcasts. Now, let her roll.
Great. So, James, what is your first musical memory?
Oh, my first musical memory. Gosh, let me think. I know that the first CD I ever bought was Queen's Greatest Hits. I was a huge fan of Queen when I was a kid. Oh gosh, that's a immediate one to jump into. Yeah, I think I just remember listening to. I really remember listening to a CD of Queen on my dad's stereo when I was very very young and being really taken with the whole thing. The drama and the overtopness of it all, just pushing in interesting directions. And also, even though it's, I you don't need me to sell you on Queen as a band, nobody does. But the slightly avant-garde theatrical kind of edge to it is something that I think lodged itself in my brain at some point. I just remember the ending of the Bits on Bicycle Race, where they just play a bunch of samples of bikes and bike horns and ringing and things like that, and thinking, "Oh, that's pretty cool. You can just do that on a track." I mean, obviously, I didn't know what that meant at that point, but I don't know. Something about just throwing a bunch of samples together sounded very appealing to me. So, is that an answer to your question?
I think so. It's quite a good answer, in fact. So, when did you first start making music?
Gosh, so I think the first time I started making music was when I was probably 14 or 15 on the family computer, when you still had a room for computers. That's very important to me, when they weren't just in every single room and every single pocket across the world. And it was downloading a copy of Audacity and just trying to make what I'd looked up the term music concrete on Wikipedia and was like, oh, I can cut things up and put them into Audacity. I can probably do that. And that's what I was doing at that point. I think all my friends at the time were forming bands, and I was in a punk band at the same time as well. I was making music in the practice room at school. But in terms of my own music, it was always recording, cutting things down, chopping things up, and just seeing where that took me. I think it was very sort of teenage anhedonia as well. It's sort of, I'm going to just obsess with a particular type of sound for a while and see what direction that takes me in. And a lot of those recordings have served me well. I realized many years later that I was making horror soundtracks. I didn't realize at the time that's what I was making, but that's what they wound up being. And I've used a lot of those recordings in time on Subterraneans. It's a lot of music I made when I was, 14, 15, 16, 17 that I came back to and realized, oh, this is a long, ominous creaking sound. This is a unpleasant drone that doesn't really go anywhere, that just sort of jumps in and out and shocks and surprises you. I've made a lot of music since then, and I use that on the show as well. But very much the heart of it is finding these old recordings that I've still got kicking around and realizing, oh, there was something to this. So yeah, that's how I started making music and how I led in this direction.
It's a really lovely story, very portentous too for a noise musician. If you use the word musician to describe the work you do.
Oh, I
Um,
would.
so like so many British avant-gardists, B12, Aphex Twin, he's not an avant-gardist, but Fatboy Slim, talk about the BBC radiophonic workshop being part of their upbringing and part of their approach to sound and kind of hearing, um, Quatermass in the Pit or Doctor Who themes on the BBC broadcast and that kind of filtering into their childhood subconsciously. Did that have any impact for you? I mean, that was, of course, you're a bit younger than Aphex Twin, but
I mean, I think to some extent, but I think my family didn't listen to BBC Radio, is the thing. They listened to Capital FM, which was descended from pirate radio broadcasts back in the day. And therefore, a lot of the sounds that I was listening to were sort of that kind of pop music and that kind of uh, you know, pirate radio descended. We are making something that is designed to be poppy and listened to for everyone, kind of thing. So obviously, I watched plenty of BBC TV when I was a kid as well. So I will have picked up the Doctor Who theme and various bits and pieces there. But I don't think I had that sort of young education in that kind of sound. I think for me, it was going online and finding these things on the early versions of Wikipedia and through various forums and people talking about the avant-garde. I had to really seek it out. It wasn't like innate to how I grew up. Which is a little different. I think it meant, especially when I was a teenager, I always felt about 5 steps behind, which I think is like a normal feeling when you're a teenager. It's like, oh, everyone else seems to know all this stuff and I'm behind. And that's simply not true. They're a few years older than you and they have been around for longer and that's how they're aware of all this stuff. But that sense of insecurity and not knowing exactly what these sounds were and how they got created led me to I have to try and figure it out myself, I didn't have the reason I was trying to make Music Concrete in Audacity is because that was a program that I knew I could download and use for free. I wasn't being encouraged by someone who had sort of walked me through the steps of, okay, it was people cutting up tapes and doing things like this. It was just, I understand if I have a waveform in front of me, I can kind of put it together in this kind of strange way. So yeah, I don't want to act like I'm entirely self-taught. It was, you know, going to places and trying to learn different digital audio workstations and things like that. But it's not part of my DNA, if you like. It's something that I sought out and found my own way into, I think. So I hope that answers your question.
it does. Thank you. It's pretty interesting and thorough. So, how does your relationship to the urban form and your show Subterraneans influence the music you make, both in terms of the artistic process and the end results?
Uh, that's a great question. So I think uh, the key sort of log line for my music and the thing that is all over the Bandcamp, things like that, is harsh noise from deep underground. Um, my connection to the city and the urban world is very very physical. um, it's very uh, my dad was a chartered surveyor, so he would work for local councils and go into buildings and take photos of the buildings that weren't big sweeping photos of how, beautiful and monumental this building looked. It was, here's where the pipes are. It's here's where the back room is. Here's how the doors don't fit quite properly, and here's the problem with the fire alarm. It's that kind of thing. I think when I get to go to buildings as part of my work or my life in general, the thing I'm always fascinated with is sort of the back area. I'm interested in the tunnels that aren't seen as much. Not, if I get a chance to go into a set of catacombs, then obviously I'm going to explore a set of catacombs. But really, what I'm interested in is the little storeroom behind the gift shop. I want to see where's the pipe work, where are the vents, where is the fire alarm system, how does the electricity cut into things. I want to see who dug the hole. That's what's interesting to me, I think, about the urban form. So, I'm very connected to London, obviously, and in my work, which I apologize, evasive about exactly what that is. Um, I've been lucky enough to spend a lot of time on building sites and in various places in the back as things are getting constructed, and I've always had a fascination with sort of that aspect of the process, like why are these buildings not falling down? I think one of the fundamental things about postmodern architecture, which I'm not going to slight, I obviously adore plenty of it, is a fascination with turning the inside out, but also with the sort of the form as a whole. And for me, I want to get so much closer than that. um, so if I'm talking about how that interacts with my music, then for me it's about the nitty gritty of how it's made. I think in almost everything I make, you can kind of hear what I'm doing. I don't think I am trying to be evasive about the process so much. Um, it might be a little broken and hard to follow, but like it's a key part of what I'm trying to do. So I don't know, process focus, but also um, what lies beneath focus kind of thing. So, when I look at the city, the city of London as a whole, all the architecture within it, it's always filled with stories of who built this, and we will never know their names. You'll know the name of the guy who funded it, but not the people who actually built it. Um, and the closest you can get to the people who actually built it, the closest sort of spiritually you can feel to that, is by finding the fire escapes, is by finding the electricity, is by finding where the fire alarms sit. That to me is very precious. I'm not sure if that necessarily gets to where we need to go, but I hope that sort of explains my relationship to it when I'm thinking about music and art.
That's good. That's really good. It kind of reminds me of this bit from Henri Lefebvre about well, I guess the nature of the capitalist city and how it kind of does violence to itself and to the people who build it by erasing its own points of origin, including where that exists in a nexus of injustice, class struggle, and things of that nature.
Most certainly.
Also, on the postmodern architecture point, we actually have one of the first ever postmodern buildings here in Portland, built in '82, called the Portland Building.
Oh,
It's as far
they're
as
imaginative on how they
it's a
named
very
it.
divisive movement. It's not a very nice building, in my opinion, and the city probably would agree because it has cost them a lot of money for things like water damage.
Mm,
Um, but like, I don't know, I've been to Paris a couple of times and seeing the Pompidou Center, for instance,
mm.
very much this sort of vertigo experience, like something you'd read in Frederick Jameson, kind of walking through this nest of spaghetti and then somehow you pop into existence inside. There's no real point of demarcation. I'm sorry though, I'm not interviewing myself, I'm interviewing you.
Please, we can talk. It's allowed, I'm sure. You're the one who has to cut this thing together. I'm quite happy to just talk. So
Fair enough. Well, moving on. So I guess away from your music and your art to some more general questions. What is the relationship between noise and music slash pop slash the song?
wow, that's the big one, isn't it? Um, I think so. I always try to start if I'm talking about noise because, every so often if you're into noise, someone will say, "What is this? What are you doing?" With on a fundamental level, when I'm listening to and making noise, I think this sounds good in the same way that someone might think a pop song sounds good. I'm reacting in the same way. I think there's often an urge on some level to start immediately jumping into intellectualizing it. But for me, just a really good texture, a really good drone, a crackle, a howl, that kind of roaring sound you get when you just put a mic too close to something or turn the gain too far up. I think that fundamentally sounds good. And I start from that position because I don't want to immediately be talking about, waste and Dadaism and all this kind of stuff. But that is also a key part of it as well. You know, Noise is very, very broad. There's a lot of different categories and things. So I'm just going to talk about some specific sort of angles into it. I think about, minimalist painting. We can all understand a Mark Rothko painting, for example, it's reduced to its barest possible elements. It is a couple of colors, and it creates something, an effect, which, even though it is stripped all the way back, is extremely imposing, extremely emotionally affecting, I think, That's just one example. Obviously, there are many other, minimalists who are about stripping back to pure forms, if you like, and creating something incredibly affecting in the process. I got into a really good conversation the other day about the Rita's magazine, which is an album that I listen to over and over and over again because somebody uploaded the liner notes for it, and they're explicitly talking about painting. This was a conceptual project almost. It is an album of just sort of just static noise, harsh noise wall, and it was almost the creation of something for a lot of people. I listen to that album and I find it so rich and chewy. I can really bite into the sounds that you get in that album, and that to me is really important. If you talk about the relationship between noise and pop, I mean, it's a relationship between pop music and the standard sort of bridge chorus, verse chorus, bridge chorus kind of pop music structure as anywhere else, which is pop devours the avant-garde. That's what it's for. It's about processing the avant-garde into something which you can play and most people will like enough. Noise isn't playing that game. It's music that, when I make music, I'm making it for myself in the first instance, I'm making something that I want to hear always, which every artist says that, but I think it applies to noise musicians more than anyone else in the world because people don't really want to hear what we're making, By its nature, we're making stuff that is abrasive, hard to listen to, and unpleasant. So for me, it always starts with, what are the sounds that I want to hear? What do I find interesting? And then if other people find it interesting, then that's great. I love that. That's, that makes my whole day. But if they don't, that doesn't, have any effect on whether or not I'm going to make it. So yeah, I suppose a couple of different layers there. There's the literal physical, I like these sounds, I think they sound good. There's the conceptual, paring things down to a minimal kind of thing in order to express something expressive, emotive, and extreme often, but sometimes that extremity can be extreme anhedonia, extreme sadness, happiness, whatever else, sort of the paring back and seeing where that leads you. And also, I suppose it ties into my thoughts about, the city in general, like trash worship, basically. Uh, the feeling of trying to find the sounds and spaces that are discarded, the things between things, and find what's special about those. So much noise is feedback worship. It's the sound which an awful lot of clever audio engineers have done everything in their life to try to reduce. I want those sounds. I'm interested in those sounds. What can I do with those, and how can I give them their due and their place in the world?
That's great. I especially like the point you made about Mark Rothko and
Mm.
his movement. There's actually this story I saw from a couple of years ago where somebody knifed one of the large Mark Rothko red canvases,
Mhm.
and then the art restoration team had a very hard time restoring it. It's not just red, it's a certain hue, certain micro texture, all these things which you might not think of it, but as a casual observer, you'd say that my child could do this, but no, your child A wouldn't have had the idea to do it, and B doesn't have the same command of technique that Rothko did and does. I'm not actually sure if he is still alive. I digress, though. Um, so maybe this is a bit of a unfair question, but does one distinguish between good and bad noise?
That's complicated because in some ways the worse it is, the better it is. The interesting thing I think about, the noise and the history of noise is it's the same as the history of almost any genre, which is nowadays, because of the ability to distribute on Bandcamp and to upload much more freely and share much easier than it has been at any point in history. There is so much more of it, and some of it is better than others, and yet it's very difficult to explain that. So I'm going to talk about, harsh noise wall, which is in some ways the most abrasive and least accessible form of noise. It is, a lot of harsh noise wall. I think about Volmir, the famous harsh noise wall artist, who, no evolution, no dynamics, no change, no ideas, nothing. That's the concept. And yet, I will listen to one of his tracks, and I will be like, this is incredible. Yeah, I get how this stands out and how it's different. For me, it's not just harsh noise wall. A good harsh noise wall is crunchy, is textural, is able to tickle my brain in a way that I find interesting. Bad harsh noise wall doesn't do that, and I will turn it off quite quickly. I suppose more, other types of noise, more dynamic, like cut up noise or psychedelic noise or things like that. It might be an emphasis on speed or aggression, or psychedelia is the other one. If you're able to get the filter sweeps just right over each other, it sounds amazing. I don't know, it can be tied to a type of vision as well. What are we trying to express with these ideas? How are you working that expression into something bigger? I do think a lot of noise can, as much as any genre, but perhaps more in some cases, live or die in how the artist talks about it and the surrounding sort of packaging on it. What's the album art? What are we talking about through this? Because unlike other music, it's not like you can just listen to the lyrics and be like, oh, it's about this and this. It's screaming synths and feedback. You won't have that thing to cling on to as you're working your way through a song. It's hard to say, it's an experimental genre, so there's also a level of what are you doing that's new, what haven't I heard before? But also it's kind of, there's the more academic edge, and there's also the punk edge, which is just, if noise is good in a performance setting, it might just be that you're capable of being loud and aggressive enough sometimes, and that works too.
For sure. Actually, it's a perfect leader into my next question. And you don't have to answer this if you're not super familiar. If you're not, yeah, I'm sure you're familiar, but if you don't feel comfortable answering, I suppose, is punk dead? And what is punk, and what would need to be true in order for it to be dead or alive? I mean, this is no longer 1976, but what has changed, if anything, and how has that affected the life or death of punk as however you choose to define it, I suppose?
Okay. See, I feel this is a great question because it really makes me want to say something really controversial and upsetting to somebody, because I feel that's the spirit of punk. Not to say I know what that thing is. I might find it as I talk to it. I just
Nobody
feel
does.
that's how I should answer that question, is just think of a band and start slagging them off. But that's that's not the approach I'll take. I think so. Any statement about punk and what it is, and if it's dead or if it's not dead, always has to be tempered with the fact that it's a huge genre and there's a lot of different things. It would be, I think, foolish of me to say this is what punk is and here is the monolith, and therefore, if that ceases to be in it, then you lose it. Um, I think about things like, uh, you know, consumer electronics, the power electronics band. I've been listening to a little bit of them for a while, and of course White House, who I'm not going to make a lot of comments on them, but what they were doing in the 80s in terms of noise and harshness and aggression in their sound clearly had ties to the punk scene. It was, we are making something that is designed to shock and upset and transgressive art. And then I think about other forms of other forms of punk. I think about Riot Girl, which I've listened to lots of, and I'm a big fan of in general, and things of that nature, which have a more sort of radical inclusiveness that aren't necessarily transgressive in the pure shock way. They're transgressive in the, here are people who aren't normally represented talking about their experiences in ways that are confrontational and unapologetic. And then I think, again, coming back to noise and the avant-garde, I think about like the cassette tape trading scene of the 90s and 2000s, and then obviously the CDR trading scene and things like that. I think if we were gonna, it feels reductive to call all of these things punk because they are so much more and much bigger things. But the fundamental ethos of make yourself, do yourself, and express yourself, and don't worry too much about formal constraints or perfection or creating something that is the ultimate version of the vision. Just do the thing that feels the most you and push it as far as you can. If I was going to try to classify punk, which is the most fool's errand I've ever began to embark upon, I would
That's
say
my
that
fault.
is where you go. You know, so yeah, that would sort of be my answer.
That's good. Yeah, it also kind of dovetails with my thoughts on punk. It's more of it's something you shouldn't necessarily reify in a certain sound. I don't know, angry chugging, adolescent guitars perhaps, and some guy using a drum kit who doesn't really know what a drum kit is. Um, White House is punk. Sophie and Arca are punk, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Rave was punk,
Mhm.
perhaps 88 to
For a minute
94 in the
there.
UK for
Yeah,
a minute
yeah.
there, which maybe it's a bit of a leading assessment on my part, which leads into the next question. Uh, is rave dead? So what is rave, of course, and what would need to be true in order for it to be dead or alive?
Oh boy. See, it's tough because I think we're in the start of a bit of a changeover. Like, if
Mm,
we were talking about what rave represented, which is a radical outsider movement, which has this feeling of hope, this wave of something washing out of something, tied obviously to a particular drug culture as well. I don't want to separate it from that because I think it's important, but also tied to a particular social movement and that sort of united feeling. Then although that particular moment, 88 to 94 is over, that is not happening anymore. I think about dubstep in the early 2000s as a clear moment for that in the early 2000s, not the late 2000s, but in the early phase there. Grime and even stuff like UK drill, which is not rave music at all. But it's outsider art, you know. I think there will be other moments for rave and rave culture. I think, some of the key social conditions are not there at the moment for, rave culture to continue on that way, which is the ability to have spaces where you can hold a rave, to be able to get outside of, particular social constraints and express yourself in that particular way. But there'll be another one. There'll be another moment.
for sure. Yeah. And so it's a bit funny. Last night I was watching the latest Bearing UK video, his UK Sound series. I'm sure you're familiar. And it was about COVID lockdown raves.
Yeah.
And I kind of locate some element of, I mean, there are many things that kind of went into the golden age, but one of them was an element of risk. You're doing
Mm,
it because you think it can be transformative in a way it isn't, like going to a show or going clubbing or going to a festival. These are legal underground, yes, but also like you're kind of the more important bit, at least to my understanding, is that you're doing it because of that. You're still choosing to go. You're doing
yeah.
it for a reason, and there's like some cultural and psychological sticking power in that transgression.
Yeah.
This night could end up in jail or can end up as one of the best nights of your life, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or I
It's the
guess you
kind of
could end
thing.
up with COVID, which that's a bit of a different story, but there's some of the
Yeah.
same
I mean,
attitude going in.
it's why I talk about the social conditions of it. Rave worked because it was somewhat illegal. It had to have some element of risk to it because that sense of risk and putting yourself out there is the foundation, not to say it led to this, but the foundation of revolutionary activity as well. The idea
Mhm.
that this could go wrong and I accept that and I'm ready to try it anyway. To be clear, I'm not suggesting rave and revolution are the same thing. We need to not get social movements confused with actual material, structural social change, but it comes from a similar place, and I think there's something precious and holy about that.
Sure. Yes. And I also kind of stick with something Jeremy Deller said a while back about how like a lot of early rave music, if you listen to it, it's not political, but the social form it takes, New Age travelers, um, squat festivals, that very much was political, and that very much was cooch to the memory of the miners' strike. When was the
Yes.
last time you had masses of people angrily occupying fields and getting in trouble with the law?
Mm,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, 100%.
which is something I like music, sorry, artists like speaker music operating today, but it's almost kind of doing the reverse. Like it's music's political in the when the form is political, not when the content is political. And if you're making political music for the gallery space or for Spotify, then something is maybe backwards there. No shade to those artists. I mean, they clearly weren't there in the 90s, and I wasn't in the 90s. And like, you need a movement to articulate your art within. But
Most certainly. I think about, my academic background, such as it is, was very much about, textual analysis and media criticism, things like that. And I think I hit a certain point where I realized you can do all the media analysis that you like, but if you aren't doing a social analysis of the conditions in which it's made, then you are missing 70% of the story, If you have made the most radical story in the world, but it's being released on Disney Plus and your workers aren't unionized, then I don't care about it. This is nothing to me. You've achieved nothing as far as I'm concerned. I'm sorry.
I feel you. Tell me about two innovative but under-listened musical artists operating today that SynKult listeners, and I guess myself included as the SynKult host, should know about.
Oh boy, I wish you'd told me this one in advance. I'd have something in the ready. I'm going to go with Gender is the Bastard because I think they're incredible. I love their work. They're a Leeds-based harsh noise / grindcore / noise grind musician whose work I absolutely adore. And everyone should check out what they're doing. I think they absolutely rule. Oh boy, who else do I got? I've got my music player open in the next window. What have I been listening to recently? You know what? I'm going to give a shout out to Lover's Leap, who is another noise musician who's based in London. I know them, so that's maybe cheating, but I really like their work. Just really interesting stuff. Again, lots of grindy power electronics, noise, interesting stuff. Yeah. So Gender is the Bastard and Lover's Leap are the two that first jumped into my mind. Also James Thompson, he's very talented.
I would tend to agree. I like James's show and also his music. One more question. Well, actually, first, are both those artists on Bandcamp or?
Yes, they
Good
are.
to know.
Yes.
I can't, according to FCC restrictions, I can't tell you need to listen to them or you should listen to them or you should go visit their page, but I will recommend it. Let's put it that way.
Of course.
We've had issues with that historically. I won't get into that. We don't have time for it. Anyway, last thing. Thank you for your time. Anything else you'd like to share about your work, music, or the world in general?
No, not particularly. I mean, I suppose I will continue to work on Subterraneans. I'm very pleased with the work I've done on it. I'm always looking for other projects I can work on. If anyone wants to ever do a music split with me, please just contact me, subterpod@gmail.com. I am very, very easy to talk to. So at any time, if anyone wants to do a split or release anything, then let me know. And just in general, come and have a chat with me. That's the key thing. I suppose I could go on a long political rant, but I can see how much time we've got left, so I'll leave that for the show itself. And you've already mentioned FCC regulations, so maybe I should hold that for a minute. But yes, in general, just it's a pleasure to chat with you. And if you need anything else from me, please just give me a shout. And yeah, you can email me directly, and I will always reply. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you for your time. That was James Thompson of Subterraneans podcast / Subterpod on Bandcamp, and I'm, of course, your host of SynKult, DJ Victor Alls.
That was James Thompson, plus me talking over James Thompson. If you feel so inclined, check out his Subterraneans podcast. Friends of SynKult would probably like Underground Shopping from Season 3 about, quote, raves at the end of history and the failed shopping malls of late capitalism. They'd also probably like The Stick from Season 5 about, quote, hypnosis, murder, and the music industry. My favorite episode of James's is probably the Aberfeldy Ghost from Season 6. You can find the Subterraneans podcast on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and most similar platforms. Now, here's Boundless Love Reprise from James's 2024 release, Boundless Love. The composition features prominently in Broadwater Prison System from Season 8 of Subterraneans. Enjoy. You heard Boundless Love reprised by James Thompson from his 2024 release Boundless Love. More music by James Thompson can be found on his Bandcamp, subterpod.bandcamp.com. That's spelled SUBTERPOD. One more piece of music to round out the night, an experimental composition by Argentine electroacoustic and computer music composer Horacio Fagione, the father of microsound and granular synthesis. If you know the whole clicks and cuts, Rasternauten, Mille Plateau sound associated with artists like Ryoji Ikeda, Mark Fell, and Alva Noto, well, they are all indebted to Vagione's compositions and experimentation. Here's what Boomcat has to say about Vagione's piece, Schall, the German word for noise. He composed it at the GRM in 1994 while teaching at the University of Paris 8. Quote, Vagione uses piano rolls to tease out freakish resonances and uncanny rhythms without treating his sounds as simple objects. There's little of the stop-start, cut-and-paste you'd expect. Vagione pulls his elements apart and crushes them together, distorting the timeline to hint at a different approach to composition. End quote. By sharpening the bleeding edge of early 90s sampling, Schall and compositions like it bring a whole new meaning to the term wall of sound. Now, as always, I'm your host, DJ Victorals with SynKult. Please enjoy Schall, and good night.